Welcome back to the channel, everyone. If you love captivating stories about men transforming into women in unique and fascinating ways, then be sure to subscribe and give this video a thumbs up. Now, let's jump right into today's tale.
Kristin woke to the scent of something delicious wafting through the house. Butter browning in a pan, the sharp tang of coffee, the unmistakable aroma of bacon sizzling. All of it combined into a siren song that tugged her from the depths of dreamless sleep. Sunlight streamed through the partially open curtains, casting long rectangles of gold across the floor of her childhood bedroom, illuminating dust motes that danced in the still air. For a moment she simply lay there, feeling well rested for the first time in what felt like forever. Her grandmother's potion had worked its magic perfectly. 8 hours of uninterrupted, blissfully blank sleep. No dreams about Daniel's revelation. No nightmares about being exposed. No subconscious working through the emotional tornado that had sent her fleeing from Gran's house. She stretched languidly, her body feeling pleasantly heavy against the familiar mattress. Her muscles were relaxed, her mind temporarily unburdened by the chaos of yesterday. It was almost possible to pretend that nothing had happened, that she was just visiting her parents' home, enjoying a lazy morning in her old bed. Almost. The weight of yesterday still sat heavy in her chest, but at least sleep had given her a small reprieve. A momentary pause in the storm, a chance to catch her breath before diving back into the churning waters of revelations and confrontations. "At least I didn't wake up to Daniel standing over me," she muttered, rubbing the remnants of sleep from her eyes. Small mercies. But now reality was waiting for her downstairs. The enticing aromas weren't coming from nowhere, and she highly doubted her absent parents had suddenly returned from their European adventure. No. There was only one person who would be in this kitchen right now. Her grandmother. The woman who had transformed her life, taught her magic, and apparently kept some very significant secrets about the man Kristin had been falling for. With a deep breath that did little to settle the nervous flutter in her stomach, Kristin swung her legs over the side of the bed. She glanced down at herself, still wearing yesterday's clothes, now wrinkled from sleep. Not ideal, but at least she wasn't facing her grandmother in Daniel's borrowed shirt. Slowly, she got up, stretching before cautiously making her way toward the kitchen. Each step down the familiar staircase felt like approaching an inevitable confrontation. The floorboard that always creaked on the third-to-last step announced her descent, eliminating any possibility of gathering herself before being noticed. And there, like she had always belonged, was her grandmother, effortlessly cooking up a storm. Gran moved through the kitchen with practiced ease, her silver hair pulled back in its usual elegant twist, her outfit casual but impeccable despite the early hour. She was humming softly, an old folk song Kristin vaguely remembered from childhood, as she tended to multiple pans on the stovetop. "Perfect timing," Gran said, without turning around, confirming Kristin's suspicion that her presence had been noted the moment she hit that creaky step. "The eggs are just about done." Kristin hesitated in the doorway, watching the older woman move about the kitchen, flipping bacon, stirring something on the stove, as if this were just any other morning. As if they were simply enjoying a family breakfast, not dealing with the aftermath of revelations that had turned Kristin's world upside down. As if she hadn't completely shattered Kristin's world yesterday. There was something surreal about the domesticity of the scene, the gentle sizzle of bacon, the warm yellow light filtering through the kitchen windows, the familiar pattern of the worn linoleum floor. All of it so normal, so utterly mundane, when nothing about her life felt normal anymore. Swallowing hard, Kristin walked to the table and sat down, waiting. She noticed it had already been set. Plates, silverware, napkins, even a small vase with fresh flowers from the garden. How long had Gran been here, preparing this staged normalcy? Her grandmother would know she was there. She always did. Gran had an uncanny awareness of her surroundings, a trait Kristin had once attributed to the sharp senses of the elderly, but now recognized as magical perception. A witch's awareness, attuned to energies and presences that ordinary people would miss. So Kristin simply sat in silence, lost in her own thoughts as she tried to sort through the mess in her head. The questions piled up like storm clouds on the horizon. Why hadn't Gran told her about Daniel? Had she known all along that he was a warlock? Was that why she'd seemed so unsurprised when they arrived together? Well, and most pressingly, had Gran known that Daniel was aware of Kristin's transformation? "You look better," Gran commented casually, still focused on her cooking. "That potion always works wonders after magical exertion. Teleportation takes a lot out of you, especially for beginners." Kristin said nothing, not ready to engage in small talk. The normalcy felt forced, artificial, a thin veneer over the chasm that had opened between them. "Your hair's a mess, though," Gran continued, unperturbed by the lack of response. "Magical sleep always gives the worst bedhead. Something about the energetic fields during unconsciousness." When this observation also failed to elicit a reply, Gran simply shrugged and returned to her cooking. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the homey sounds of breakfast preparation, the scrape of a spatula, the pop of sizzling bacon, the soft clink of a spoon against the side of a mug. 10 minutes passed. The kitchen filled with the rich aromas of a complete breakfast, eggs scrambled to fluffy perfection, bacon fried crisp, but not burnt, toast slathered with real butter, sliced fruit arranged in colorful patterns, coffee brewed from freshly ground beans. All of it placed on the table with Gran's usual efficiency, creating a spread that would have been tempting under any other circumstances. Kristin barely noticed when a plate of bacon and eggs was set in front of her, along with a steaming cup of coffee. The food might as well have been cardboard for all the interest she showed in it, her appetite buried beneath the weight of yesterday's revelations. She only stirred from her thoughts when her grandmother finally sat down across from her. The older woman settled into her chair with a soft sigh, smoothing her napkin across her lap with practiced elegance. She didn't immediately reach for her food, instead studying Kristin with those penetrating eyes that always seemed to see more than they should. The silence stretched between them, her grandmother giving her the space to speak first. It was a familiar tactic. Gran had always preferred to let uncomfortable conversations begin organically, allowing the other person to set the tone and direction. Countless childhood confessions and teenage admissions had begun this way, with Gran's patient silence drawing out truths more effectively than direct questioning ever could. But Kristin didn't take the bait. She remained stubbornly quiet, refusing to make this easy. If Gran wanted to talk about what happened, she could be the one to start. After all, she was the one with explanations to give, secrets to reveal. So, with that gentle but knowing tone, her grandmother finally broke the ice. "Honey, what's wrong?" The question hung in the air between them, so innocuous on the surface, so loaded underneath. As if Gran didn't know exactly what was wrong. As if yesterday's bombshell could be brushed aside with a casual inquiry. Kristin said nothing, just stared down into her coffee, gripping the mug a little too tightly. The ceramic was hot against her palms, almost painful, but she welcomed the sensation. It gave her something to focus on besides the knot of emotions tangled in her chest. "The silent treatment?" Gran asked, a hint of amusement creeping into her voice. "I haven't seen that from you since you were 14, and I wouldn't let you go to that concert with those friends I didn't approve of." The comparison ignited a spark of irritation in Kristin's chest. This wasn't some teenage tantrum. This was about fundamental trust, about life-altering secrets kept from her. "This isn't exactly the same thing," she muttered, the words escaping before she could stop them. Gran's expression softened, a small victory flickering in her eyes at having finally drawn a response. No, it's not, she acknowledged. But the principle remains the same. Silence solves nothing, Kristin. And what exactly would you like me to say? Kristin asked, setting her mug down with more force than necessary. Coffee sloshed over the rim, creating a small puddle on the polished tabletop. Thanks for breakfast, by the way. How about that weather? Oh. And why didn't you mention that the man I've been sleeping with knows I used to be someone else entirely? Her grandmother sighed, reaching for a napkin to blot the spilled coffee. I know you weren't expecting that, but why did you react that way? The question caught Kristin off guard. She had expected defensiveness, perhaps an apology, maybe even a lecture about magical secrecy and tradition. But not this, not a genuine inquiry into her emotional response, as if Gran truly didn't understand why the revelation had been so devastating. Why did I? Kristin began, incredulous. Are you serious right now? You drop a bombshell that Daniel is not only a warlock but has known about my transformation. And you're surprised I reacted badly. I'm not surprised you were shocked, Gran clarified, her tone maddeningly reasonable. I'm curious about why you ran. What specifically about Daniel, knowing the truth, frightened you so much? Kristin opened her mouth to retort, then closed it again. The question cut too close to her core fears, the ones she'd been avoiding examining too closely, even in the privacy of her own mind. He knew, she said finally, her voice smaller than she intended. All this time he knew who I used to be. And he never said anything. Would you have preferred he announce it on your first date? Gran asked, raising an eyebrow. Hello, nice to meet you. I can tell you used to be a man. How exactly would that conversation have gone? Put that way, it did sound ridiculous. But that wasn't the point. He should have told me he knew, Kristin insisted. Instead, he just, watched me, studied me. Decided to date me anyway, like some kind of, I don't even know what. Like someone who was attracted to you regardless of your past, Gran suggested gently. Kristin swallowed hard, her throat tightening. The possibility was both wonderful and terrifying, that Daniel had known her secret and wanted her anyway. That his desire hadn't been despite her transformation, but inclusive of it. That he had seen all of her, past and present, and still chosen to pursue her. It was too much to hope for. Too perfect. And in Kristin's experience, anything that seemed too perfect usually was. Or maybe he just wanted to experiment, she countered, voice bitter. See what it would be like to be with someone like me. A novelty. A magical curiosity. Gran shook her head, a flash of genuine disappointment crossing her features. Is that truly what you think of him after everything you've shared? I don't know what to think anymore, Kristin admitted, the words catching in her throat. That's the problem. Slowly, she lifted her gaze, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears as she finally looked at her grandmother. All the confusion, the hurt, the fear that had been building since yesterday's revelation, it all threatened to spill over, a dam about to break under too much pressure. I thought I knew him, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I thought what we had was real. But now, how can I trust anything about us when he's been keeping this secret all along? Gran's expression softened, maternal concern replacing the earlier frustration. She reached across the table, her weathered hand covering Kristin's trembling one. Perhaps, she suggested gently, before you decide what this means for your relationship, you should actually talk to him. Let him explain why he kept his knowledge to himself. And why should I believe anything he says now? Kristin asked, though the question held less heat than before, uncertainty creeping in where certainty had been. Because, Gran replied simply, in all the ways that truly matter, he's never lied to you. The statement hung between them, a challenge and a comfort all at once. Kristin wanted to argue. to point out that omission was its own form of deception, that keeping such a significant secret was tantamount to lying. But she couldn't seem to form the words, couldn't seem to hold on to her anger in the face of Gran's calm certainty. Because deep down, beneath the hurt and confusion, a small voice was whispering that perhaps Gran was right. That perhaps what she and Daniel had built together wasn't a lie, even if it had been constructed on incomplete foundations. That perhaps there was still something worth fighting for, if only she could find the courage to face him again. Kristin swallowed against the tightness in her throat, forcing herself to hold her grandmother's gaze. The morning light streaming through the kitchen windows caught the silver in Gran's hair, illuminating the fine lines around her eyes, lines that spoke of wisdom earned through decades of experience. That steady gaze had always been both comforting and intimidating, as if Gran could see straight through any pretense to the truth beneath. The kitchen smelled of bacon and coffee, of toast and the faint hint of the lavender sachets Gran kept in the drawers. It was familiar, soothing in its normalcy, a stark contrast to the emotional chaos churning inside her. She hadn't meant to run yesterday. The thought came with a flush of embarrassment, a prickle of heat across her cheeks. Teleporting away had been a knee-jerk reaction, pure survival instinct kicking in when emotions became too overwhelming. It wasn't something she was proud of, but she had. The reality of her actions sat heavy in her stomach. She had fled rather than face the uncomfortable truth, had chosen escape over confrontation. It wasn't her finest moment. She hadn't meant to shut down, to teleport away like a coward. Kyle never would have run from a confrontation. He'd been stubborn to a fault, willing to stand his ground even when outnumbered or outmatched. But Kristin had discovered different instincts, different responses to emotional threats. When cornered, she didn't fight, she fled. But she had. "I'm not usually the running type," she said finally, breaking the silence that had stretched between them. "At least, I didn't think I was." "High emotion can trigger instinctive magic," Gran replied, her tone matter-of-fact rather than judgmental. "Especially in recent transformations. Your magical core is still stabilizing, still learning to work with your emotions rather than being overwhelmed by them." It wasn't quite an absolution, but it wasn't condemnation either. And now, sitting here in the kitchen of her childhood home, with the warmth of freshly cooked food in front of her and the comforting presence of her grandmother across the table, she felt the weight of it all crushing her. The revelations about Daniel, the implications for their relationship, the uncertainty about what was real and what wasn't, all of it pressed down on her chest, making each breath feel like a deliberate effort. Her grandmother said nothing, just waited. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, wasn't meant to pressure. It was the silence of someone who understood that some thoughts needed time to form, some emotions needed space to breathe before they could be expressed. Gran had never been one to rush a conversation, especially when it mattered, because she knew Kristin needed to let this out on her own terms. It was how they had always operated, Gran providing the space, Kristin eventually filling it with whatever was troubling her. It had been their pattern through teenage heartbreaks, college disappointments, adult setbacks. A ritual of patience and eventual revelation. So Kristin took a deep breath, staring down at the coffee mug in her hands, before finally speaking. The dark liquid reflected her face in distorted miniature, a warped version of herself that somehow felt appropriate, given the circumstances. "I freaked out because it felt like I'd been lied to," she admitted softly, her voice a little hoarse. The words felt inadequate, a pale shadow of the complex emotions swirling inside her. But they were a start. Her grandmother didn't interrupt. She simply nodded slightly, her expression open, receptive. Encouraging without pushing. "Daniel knew almost from the start," Kristin continued, her fingers tightening around the mug until her knuckles whitened. The ceramic was still warm against her palms, grounding her in the present moment. And I didn't. I was just living my life, thinking I was figuring things out on my own, thinking I was learning what it meant to be me, as Kristin. But the whole time, he knew about my past. He knew that I wasn't always a woman, and he never said anything. She remembered their first meeting, how nervous she'd been, how conscious of every gesture, every word. She'd been trying so hard to be natural, to embody this new self without drawing attention to the ways it still felt foreign. And all the while, he'd been watching her with those perceptive eyes, seeing more than she'd realized. "It's like finding out someone's been reading your diary," she added, searching for analogies that might capture the violation she felt. "Like they've been watching you through a window when you thought you were alone." She let out a shaky laugh, shaking her head at the absurdity of it all. 2 months ago, she'd been a man with no knowledge of magic. Now she was a woman, a witch, falling for a warlock who had apparently seen through her magical transformation from the beginning. "I mean, what does that even mean?" she asked, half to herself, the frustration evident in the slight crack in her voice. Was he just humoring me? Was he watching me stumble through all of this, watching me try to understand what it meant to be Kristin, while he already knew everything? Did he think it was funny? Did he just want to see how far I'd go? Was I just some kind of, I don't know, experiment to him? Her voice cracked on the last word, and she inhaled sharply, fighting back the emotion trying to choke her. The vulnerability of the question hung in the air between them, raw and exposed. "Do you truly believe Daniel is that kind of person?" Gran asked quietly. The question caught Kristin off guard. Did she, after weeks of getting to know him, of seeing his integrity in business dealings, his loyalty to friends, his genuine concern for others, did she really believe he was capable of such calculated cruelty? "I don't know what to believe anymore," she replied, the uncertainty evident in her tone. "I thought I knew him, but he kept this massive secret from me. He let me think I was successfully passing as a woman who had always been a woman, when all along he knew the truth. And yet," Gran observed, her tone deliberately neutral, "he pursued you anyway. Despite knowing your past, he wanted you, as you are now." Kristin flinched slightly, unprepared for the way those words landed. She had been so focused on the deception, on the violation of privacy, that she hadn't fully considered what Daniel's continued interest despite his knowledge might mean. "Maybe he just has unusual tastes," she muttered, deflecting with cynicism rather than engaging with the more hopeful interpretation. Gran's eyebrow arched. "Is that really what you think? That his interest in you is some sort of fetish?" Put that way, it sounded ridiculous. Daniel's attraction had never felt fetishistic or exploitative. It had felt genuine, multi-dimensional, based on who she was as a person, not just her physical form or unusual circumstances. "No," she admitted reluctantly. "But it's easier to believe that than to think he might actually." She trailed off, unable to complete the thought. "Care about you," Gran supplied. "Desire you, value you for exactly who you are, past, present, and all."